بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله العلي الكبير خلق الإنسان وحثهم على التفكير والصلاة والسلام على بشير ونذير أما بعد. قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كلامه المجيد وفي فرقانه الحميد بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إنا نحن نزلنا الذكر وإنا له لحافظون. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم من حدث عني بحديث يرى أنه كذب فهو أحد الكاذبين وقال كاذبين أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Alhamdulillah, we've reached quite further into our journey of Mustalah al-Hadith, but the aim was to actually finish by now. But Alhamdulillah, little problem. This one. So the aim was actually to finish by now, but Alhamdulillah, we have got quite pretty far. And unfortunately, last week's recording wasn't preserved and it wasn't sent out. So we'll just run through what we did last time in brief. So last time we covered the hadith mu'an'an and hadith mu'annan. These are two terminologies that we used when a hadith narrator says from so-and-so, from so-and-so. So when the hadith narrator says that one person narrated to me from so-and-so, and this is hadith mu'an'an. And we spoke about the rulings regarding hadith mu'an'an. We gave examples regarding it. We spoke about what the muhaddithin said about it. As in mu'an'an can be sahih hadith also. And then we spoke about the hadith mu'annan. So when the hadith narrator says an fulan, like someone said this, and majority of the hadith scholars say that anna and an are the same and they are equated together. And there is possible that if they fulfill the conditions, then they are on hadith muttasil, they are a connected chain of hadith. And then we went on to saying the reasons why a hadith narrator is kind of disparaged and why he's accused, the actual kind of legitimate ways to disparage a hadith narrator, because we knew there are some illegitimate ways, things which are not considered, and from the things which aren't considered are, for example, what Al-A'mash used to say regarding people if he saw them in a particular, if you saw them on a black horse, he would say this guy's driving a good car, nice car, he's driving a nice car, so let's not accept hadith from him, because he's too engulfed in the dunya, right? But this is not a kind of a legitimate way to criticize a hadith scholar, right? You can't say just because he's driving a nice car, but there are other legitimate ways of doing so. And can you give me examples of them? I mentioned this last time as well.
Well, why people don't accept certain narrators?
Yeah. What could the reasons be?
Because the teacher is younger than them. That's one.
That's one. That was a kind of a difficult one to remember. Not the first one, but that's one. People don't mention the teacher because of that. But what are kind of the reasons why people don't accept? Like one of the main reasons. Why wouldn't you accept a hadith from someone?
Oh, because I haven't studied. It's got deficiency in his knowledge.
Yeah, deficiency in knowledge. Adam al-Dhabt, right? They're not deficient in knowledge. What's a more obvious thing? Why wouldn't I accept what someone says just in general?
He's a liar.
He's a liar. Guy chats a lot, right? He waffles about, don't accept what this guy says. So one of the main reasons is kidb. And then we also talked about tuhma bil kidb. Person is accused of lying. But then we also said that if a person, if he kind of is accused of lying, and it has to be kind of followed up after that, right? And I just remembered one thing which a couple of weeks ago we mentioned, I can't remember, it was a kind of cliffhanger of why the most unluckiest person when the Arabs say fulanun ash'am min ta'us, because he was born on the day the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, right? And then he kind of he was weaned off by his mother, and he started to eat solid foods on the day Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala passed away, right? And then he got married, etc. At the time, I think he got married at the time when Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala who was assassinated, right? On the day Ali radiallahu ta'ala passed away, that's when he had his child. So this guy, when the Arabs say fulanun ash'am min ta'us, they mean this guy.
What's his name?
Ta'us. And this is mentioned, it's mentioned, this qissa. It's mentioned because these Maulanas have read it. Places. Do you know it's mentioned? Which book? It's in an early other work that you read very early. You definitely have read it. Everyone has read it. Fahim has read it as well. It's in Nafhatul Arab.
I mean, I read that.
Did you guys not do Nafhatul Arab? They did it. I know they did it. The Nafhatul Arab is mentioned. A story incident, and it was regarding people passing away, and when on the day someone else dies. 2 weeks ago we spoke about that. And then another reason why people don't accept is fisq, because someone is a fasiq, they are an open sinner. And then bid'ah as well, someone engages in open bid'ah. And then we spoke about the hadith, man waqqara sahiba bid'atin faqad a'ana ala hadmi al-Islam. Whoever honors a person of bid'ah, then they are indeed helping the destruction of the faith. So that's something to watch out for. And jahala, when this person is unknown, this narrator is unknown, this is a reason why we kind of, it affects the chain. It affects the reliability of the chain if the person is unknown. And then we clarified jahala means jahalatul ayn. So jahala means jahalatul ayn, that it's definite that this person, in essence, this person is unknown. And we gave the example, Ibn Hazm radiallahu ta'ala, who said Imam Tirmidhi was majhul. But of course he wasn't majhul, right? Everyone knew him. But maybe in that portion of Andalus, he was kind of, his book never reached, and it didn't reach Ibn Hazm with the sanad. But according to all the other hadith scholars, Imam Tirmidhi, Abu Isa Tirmidhi, he was majhul. He wasn't majhul, sorry. Muhammad ibn Isa ibn Sawra ibn Musa Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala. Again, another one is in regards to the precision. I think Ahmed mentioned regarding the intellect, if it's not there. Fuhshul ghalat, if they make numerous mistakes and many mistakes, right, then it's not accepted, right? It's not, the narration isn't accepted. And we spoke about this a few weeks ago, but I'd like to mention it again. Just because you make mistakes doesn't mean that you're a bad hadith narrator, you're da'if straight away, right? Because we know, for example, Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, he made mistakes in 40 of the narrations, and he khalafa Sufyan al-Thawri. So him and Sufyan al-Thawri narrated the same hadith, 40 hadith they narrated, right? And he kind of made mistakes in all 40, and Sufyan was actually correct on this occasion. But and the scholars usually say that if Sufyan and Shu'bah disagree, Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, he was Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith, but he made mistakes in 40 narrations. But that's in comparison to the thousands and thousands of narrations he mentioned and he narrated. And these weren't like major mistakes. It could be like maqloob, which is switched over names and pronouncing the names wrong, things like that. These weren't major mistakes. But regardless, but he did make mistakes. But he was known as Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith despite that. And it's usually said in these 40 narrations as well, that if he went against Sufyan al-Thawri, then you would give preference to Shu'bah when there was a difference of opinion in the matan. So when the matan is disregarded, Assalamu alaikum, Assalam. Ashabul London. Inshallah. So we're talking about Shu'bah ibn al-Hajjaj. He was a hadith narrator, and when even though he made mistakes, we were talking about 40 mistakes that he made, right? Even though he made mistakes, he was still regarded as Amirul Mu'mineen fil Hadith, an Imam in Hadith, even though he made mistakes. And we were talking about when he disagreed with Sufyan al-Thawri in these 40 narrations. Usually when it comes to difference of opinion in the matan, in the actual hadith, you would prefer Shu'bah. This is what some of the hadith scholars say. And when it's to do, when it's to do with the actual chain, you would prefer Shu'bah. And it's actually to do with the wording of the hadith, you would prefer Sufyan. But in this case, the scholar said that Sufyan, it wasn't Sufyan ibn Uyayni, it was Sufyan al-Thawri. Yes, Sufyan al-Thawri. They preferred, for all of these narrations were on the opinion of Sufyan al-Thawri. So he made a few mistakes in this hadith. So it's only when you make really, really bad mistakes that it affects your reliability. And then su'ul hifz, when you have a deficiency in sort of your hifz. And we mentioned, for example, Ibn Lahi'a, he used to narrate in his early days from his books, then his books got burnt, he had a bad memory. And when he narrated after that point, his hadith were not taken as authentic because obviously he had a deficiency in memory, he wasn't that strong in his memory. Kathratul awham, mukhalafat al-thiqat. And then ghafla, kathratul awham, that they keep on thinking, oh, Fulan narrated to me, so-and-so narrated to me. Do you guys know what talqeen is? Obviously, I think I've told all of these brothers here. You know what talqeen is? In general in the Sharia, what talqeen is. Everyone should know actually. Talqeen. When someone dies, you say La ilaha illallah, you remind them. You don't command them to say La ilaha illallah, you remind them to say La ilaha illallah. You guys have heard of this, right? So this is called talqeen. You're reminding them, right? You're reminding them La ilaha illallah. So you don't, when someone dies, you don't order them to say La ilaha illallah, you just keep on saying La ilaha illallah in the room. That's why you might see when someone passes away, everyone just reciting La ilaha illallah softly, just to remind them to say La ilaha illallah. So in hadith narrations as well, we have a different type of talqeen. You know this type of talqeen. This type of talqeen is when the hadith student says to the hadith scholar, you narrated this hadith to me. But he's like, he doesn't know. He's like, oh yeah, I did narrate that hadith to you. Actually, he doesn't know. This is talqeen, right? So if you have to do talqeen, if your student has to tell you, you narrated this hadith to me, then obviously you're not really on it. As in, you don't have it in your book, you're not narrating, you don't have precision in your memory as well. So again, if the student has to do talqeen, then it's not on. So you keep on thinking, oh yeah, I possibly could have narrated to you, possibly maybe didn't narrate to you. So this is talqeen. And then mukhalafat al-thiqat, we go into this. If you go against a more reliable narrator, right? If you are narrating a hadith and you go against more reliable narrators, then this is another reason why we don't accept you as a narrator. So these were just listing the reasons why we don't accept narrators, particular narrators. These could be they are deficient in their memory, could be they are liars, could be they are accused of lying, could be they are not, they are not sound in terms of their transmissions, etc. So all these kind of things. And then we come on to the hadith Mawdoo we spoke about. Hadith Mawdoo and hadith da'if are two different things. And this is what, unfortunately, a lot of our Salafi brethren, they equate hadith Mawdoo with hadith da'if. A fabricated narration is different from a weak narration. And we spoke about this, that hadith is a game of probabilities when we talk about hadith transmission. It's like the Prophet ﷺ is more likely to have said this, right? So usually, if it's an authentic hadith, everything's fine in the chain, blah, 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 everything's 100%. It could be that the person who heard it wrong, like they might have heard 1, 2 things wrong, right? But they transmitted it and it doesn't affect their reliability because they are precise and they are trustworthy and everyone is trustworthy in the chain. But this hadith entered the corpus of hadith. And later, when we do scrutiny of the actual text of the hadith, then it might come about, hey, hold on, this doesn't make sense, right? And why doesn't it make sense? Let's reconcile. Let's look at this. And this was the job of the fuqaha, to actually look at this kind of thing. And this is why they say the fuqaha are the doctors and the muhaddithin are the pharmacists, right? But I think this is a very kind of wrong definition, because our understanding of a doctor and a pharmacist, myself, the brothers combined, doctor and pharmacist, he'll tell you both, right? Our understanding of doctor and pharmacist is completely different in NHS, etc., right? A doctor, and it doesn't work like that. I think that was a bad example, but they say in the hadith books, right? Our understanding of a doctor and a pharmacist is different to a muhaddith and a faqih, right? Because they have overlap, etc. So this is a bad example, but they do mention this, that the fuqaha are the atibba and the muhaddithun are the pharmacists. I forget the Arabic word for it. So, oh yeah, what was I talking about? Sayyid Ali, something like that. So it's mentioned in one of these books. So hadith da'if, hadith mawdu, it's a game of probability. It could be that it's authentic, it's weak, right? Hadith, weak hadith, but the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually said it. But the person who heard him, sometimes, sometimes obviously the Sahaba wouldn't, further down the chain, might be sometimes, a bit lying, mixing the truth up a bit, telling tales, right? So that's why the hadith was weak, but actually it's what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and it's in line with the message of Islam. So how do we scrutinize this? Again, this is the methodology we use. Hadith, again, another point was hadith da'if and hadith mawdu are not the same thing. A fabricated hadith and a da'if hadith, a weak hadith, are not the same thing. A fabricated hadith, someone's invented it, right? A da'if hadith is just low probability that this hadith is authentic. And we looked at, I think a couple of weeks ago, this guy came about. I don't know who he is. I saw him on the WhatsApp group. He actually tried to do a probability study of hadith, a mathematical equation. Kind of, this hadith is 65% authentic, blah, blah, blah. But it didn't make sense on a few accounts. It didn't make sense because he just arbitrarily placed a percentage on what he would think that maybe this is 50% sahih. We'll look into that afterwards. I'll send it around. But yeah, it just didn't make sense to kind of put it to numbers because it's so subjective, right? Because, for example, there was a mukhtalaf fi rawi, a narrator which the scholars disagreed upon. Some say it's sahih, some say it's da'if. Then what do you do then? Things like that. It didn't really. But he tried to develop an algorithm, and it was a creative thing to do, right? And I think it's something that we need to look into as well in the future. Khidmah of hadith in that sense, but it's just a bit far-fetched. So hadith da'if, hadith mawdu. Hadith mawdu is an invented hadith, and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam warned that whoever says a hadith and they see that there is a lie in it, then they are one of the liars, right? And there's two ways that people invent hadith. Either they invent a sentence and they just say this is hadith, this is what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, or either they take a saying of a pious person or a saying of wisdom, and they kind of mask that and they say this is a hadith. So there's two ways of doing it. Either you do it like that, either you invent something yourself, or either you take a nice sentence. For example, sticks and stones break my bones, right? But words will never hurt me. Hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sounds good, right? Sounds okay, wisdom kind of saying. And these hadith are always spread about on social media, on WhatsApp, etc. This hadith sounds good, the meaning sounds good, but we actually have to chase up the reliability and the authenticity of these such narrations. So how would you know a hadith is mawdu? How would you know a fabricated hadith is fabricated? Like in just general. The chain. But how would we know from the chain?
As in,
it's completely invented hadith.
The person who fabricated admitted it.
He admitted it. Because a lot of people, for example, Abu Usman Nuh ibn Abi Maryam, on his deathbed, he admitted that he fabricated many hadith because of to do with the virtues of reciting Quran, right? For surah, lots of surahs, he said, Ibn Abbas said that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if you read Surah Yasin 10 times, then you're going to get 10 gardens in paradise. I'm not saying this particular narration, but so many hadith. If you read Surah Nur 7 times, you're going to get 5, you're going to get, not 5 wives, you're going to get 4 wives, blah, blah, blah. Brothers will be reading Surah Nur every single night. But these sort of hadith, you read already. Like, checking if the hadith is mawdu or not. Just checking, innit? Just checking. So certain hadith, so he admitted actually that, okay, I invented so many hadith regarding the virtues of the Quran. He thought what he was doing was good because he's saying, okay, if you read this surah, you're going to get this amount of reward. But he didn't realize he's actually lying against the Prophet ﷺ. And certain other people did it for their own agendas as well. I mentioned last week as well. Some people, this guy, he said on his deathbed, I invented so many hadith. The reason I invented this hadith were because people were getting too involved with fiqh, the fiqh of Abu Hanifa. And I wanted them to read the Quran again. So I invented hadith about the Quran, right? And then we mentioned hadith as well. Like some people wanted to, had an agenda. Maybe I'm from a particular school of thought, right? And there's this hadith, Man rafa'a yadayhi faqad kafar. Whoever does rafa yadayn, then they're a kafir. Right? Things like this actually exist in the corpus of hadith. People invent that for their own agendas. And for example, the hadith we mentioned, not hadith, the qawl we mentioned of one of the scholars, or an individual, he says, يكون في أمتي رجل أشد على أمتي من إبليس واسمه محمد بن إدريس. There'll be a man who's going to come in my ummah, he's going to be worse upon my ummah than Iblis, and his name is going to be Muhammad ibn Idris, who's Shafi, and then ويكون في هذه الأمة ويكون في هذه الأمة رجل يكون سراج هذه الأمة واسمه أبو حنيفة, that kind of thing. They're going to say there's going to be a man who's going to come, he's going to be the lantern of this ummah, he's going to be Abu Hanifa. These are clearly fabricated, you can tell by just looking, they're against logic. It's the logic of Quran and Hadith. It's not like that. Places and names aren't really mentioned specifically. There's so many hadith about Dajjal. The scholar, he did a talk about the hadith of Dajjal, right? We know which scholar, we're not going to mention which scholar it was. But mashallah, he was mentioning narrations, and our Ustad said actually, he took him from the Turkish library, because any hadith you want, you can find it in the Turkish library. And you go to the Turkish libraries, you can find it in some manuscript. People wrote all sorts. So he was saying like there's hadith about Dajjal, and he says Saddam Hussein, and there was a guy from America, and it wasn't literally, it's there, right? He was mentioning these narrations, but of course it wasn't from the style of the Quran and Hadith to to kind of mention specific names and things like that. Otherwise it would have been well known. Right? Okay, we're waiting for this guy called Saddam. Obviously, he's going to be from this tribe, blah, 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 and they're trying to pinpoint it towards this. And there's going to be, there's going to be China, and, these places didn't even exist back then, right? The geographical location was there, but the names of the places weren't there, The kind of dynamics of the world were completely different at that time to this time. So it wasn't from the style and the kind of siyaq and of the Quran and the Hadith to mention these things, but people have mentioned it, and it's obviously Mawdoo. Or it could be that you clocked the guy got clocked, as in for Mawdoo Hadith he says, yeah, so and so narrated from so and so, right? But so and so, the person who narrated from died before he was even born, and you clock him right there. That's a fabricated narration. Or it could be because a person, he's of a particular agenda, and he narrates hadith regarding, for example, there's a hadith here from the Shi'i group who say that there's a hadith, Aliyun khayrul bashar man shakka fihi faqad kafar. Ali is the best of people. Whoever has a doubt in that, then they have committed kufr, and they are kuffar, all kuffar. One of these. So obviously these things you can tell them from the matan, yes.
Okay, so give examples of some common ones I should know that are big. It's normally like when they give virtues of the Quran,
yeah, normally it's virtues of the Quran, like that's a red flag. You have red flags.
Examples like proper common ones you have heard.
Yeah, for these ones I'm mentioning here, the fadail of surah, the fadail of certain surahs, and there's entire hadith books, and that moves on to the next point actually. Okay, and then the next point is this hadith doesn't even make sense in terms of the grammatically incorrect hadith, right? It doesn't make sense against, for example, the hadith says, kill all the kuffar that you see, right? This hadith is obviously fabricated because it goes against the message of Islam, the rahmah of Islam. Do you get me? These kind of hadith, obviously you can tell, there's things obviously you can tell, like naturally you'll think that the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wouldn't say this kind of word. Right, so it will raise red flags. Automatically you won't be able to tell that hadith Mawdoo because it sounds nice. These hadith which have good meaning, they have good, nice sounding meanings. Good quote. Everyone loves to share quotes, but some people just bang hadith at the end. Brackets hadith, brackets Bukhari. A lot of the time people write brackets Bukhari, and obviously Bukhari, it's not even a hadith. Never mind the most authentic book of hadith is not even a hadith. Brackets Bukhari. Jargon blinds. That's why whenever you see something kind of untowards, right, you have to kind of investigate it. It's really important that we investigate it, or we ask about it. There's a lot of things in our Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we need to know, He's made it clear. Right? What we need to know, He's made it clear. When something's kind of untowards or kind of strange or like a marvelous kind of thing, you have to always try and investigate it, because it might be invented. So examples of these are what we mentioned. And when is the occasion you are allowed to narrate fabricated hadith? When would you narrate fabricated hadith?
To tell people that's fake.
MashaAllah, to tell people that it's fake. So you're allowed to narrate a fabricated hadith, and this is why, for example, Mullah Ali Al-Qari has got a huge book on Mawdoo hadith, Kitab al-Mawdu'at as well by Ibn al-Jawzi, and the most famous, Allah al-Masnu'a fil Ahadith al-Mawdu'a by As-Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala, and we mentioned a few of them last week, and it's Talkhis by Ibn Iraq al-Kannani, التنزيه الشريعة المرفوع عن حديث الشنيعة الموضوعة, Allah al-Masnu'a. It means the pearls. You have an original pearl, and this was the title of Asyuti's book, The Fake Pearls, in discussing the fabricated hadith. This was the title of his book. So he narrated a lot of these fake hadith in there. There's so many, but it's really important that whenever we see like a saying, we don't spread it straight away without authenticating it, without verifying its reference. And obviously the worst type of hadith is the hadith Mawdoo. But there were groups from the Muslims who thought that narrating hadith Mawdoo, if someone's going to do something good, if I narrate a hadith Mawdoo for a virtue, and if I narrate it to them and they do something good, I'm going to get the reward for it. I'm just inventing a lie upon the Prophet. For example, a group called the Karramiyya were a group in Islam, and they said if we narrate a hadith and someone else does a virtuous action from it, for example, if I tell you, if you read Surah Fatiha 3 times, you're going to get the world and everything in it, right? You're obviously going to read it 3 times. Some brothers, mashallah, if I say read Surah Yasin 5 times, and you're going to get married within 2 months, the perfect one is going to come along right there. Everyone will be reading Surah Yasin more than 5 times. Just checking if that is in Mawdoo or not, this sort of thing. So some people actually thought that if we narrate this and people do the action, we're going to get reward for it, and it's a good thing. But the reality is it's wrong, it's haram, and we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And it's only haram when you narrate it because you're trying to make people like off the path. And for example, some scholars even said, for example, Sheikh Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni said, whoever invents hadith fabric, they are a kafir. So some people don't go to that extreme, but obviously if you're inventing a lie upon the Prophet ﷺ, it's a big thing. Some of the mufassirun, when we look at books of tafsir, for example, Al-Tha'labi, Al-Wahidi, Al-Zamakhshari, Al-Baydawi, Al-Shawkani, they have got some Mawdoo hadith there. But I mentioned this last time as well. This is kind of unfair to say they narrated Mawdoo hadith. Maybe at their time, the sciences of Mustalah al-Hadith were being formulated, right? That there was nothing set in stone. Maybe the hadith reached them with an authentic chain, or a chain which they thought appeared as authentic to them, and they just included that in their books of tafsir, because these are some of them were very early scholars, right? And it could be the science was just coming about there, kind of fledgling science, and everyone's kind of getting their opinion here and there, and then hadith reached them and they included it in their book, but later on they found out that this hadith is hadith Mawdoo. So one of the points of caution, a red flag, is when we see hadith about virtues of Quran, especially from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, because he was a target for many people, that people invented lies against him. And the reason was, what was the reason? The reason was obviously Ibn Abbas. Who was he? He was the nephew, the cousin of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the cousin of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, regarding whom the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allahumma faqihhu fid din wa 'allimhu at-ta'wil. Oh Allah, give him insight into the religion and teach him the interpretations of the Quran. So if the Prophet made a dua for him, this is in Sahih al-Bukhari. This is authentic. Everyone knows Ibn Abbas is the guy to go for Quran tafsir. So if you say he said things, people are likely to accept it. So we should be very cautious when we look at the riwayat, the marwiyat of from Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, to an extent that some of our teachers even said that 2/3 of the hadith narrated from Ibn Abbas regarding the fadail of Quran are indeed fabricated. But obviously this might be a slight exaggeration. Then we have the hadith matruk. Matruk means that which is abandoned, and it's when we leave a certain hadith, and this is when there is a narrator in this chain which he has been accused of lying. And what's the reasons why we have accusations that a narrator is a liar? So Allah yura ذلك الحديث إلا من جهته ويكون مخالفا للقواعد المعلومة. So this hadith, this is the only person who's narrating it. For example, I said, whoever eats apples, they will enter from the 7th gate of paradise. Whoever eats apples, right? I'm the only person who's narrating this, right? And it's against logic. Wow, what good is there in an apple? Kind of thing. It's against a logical principle, right? And it's not something from the unseen, because if it was from something from the unseen, then it would have been a stronger narration. More people would have heard it if Allah wanted us to know about it. So these sort of things we have to be cautious. So if it was against clear logical principle, and this is the only individual who's narrating it, and then another reason is that this person he just chats a lot when he's talking in general amongst his friends and general people. So when it comes to hadith, you wouldn't accept from him, right? Because he's known to be a liar. Okay, for example, a guy, حديث عمرو بن شمر الجعفي الكوفي عن جابر عن أبي الطفيل عن علي وعمار قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم في الفجر ويكبر يوم عرفة من صلاة الغداة ويقطع صلاة العصر آخر أيام التشريق. Nasai and Daraqutni said, and other than them said, that Amr ibn Shamir is matrukul hadith. Okay, so then we have marra bina anna ashar al-da'if, the worst form of da'if. Yeah,
Give me some examples of fake hadith about Hajj and Umrah.
Fake hadith about Hajj and Umrah. I don't know them off the top of my head, man. You have to look in Kitab al-Mawdu'at. We'll tell you though.
Is it?
There must be. Kitab al-Mawdu'at is downstairs. It's downstairs.
Was it a book of like fake hadith?
Yeah, so he collected a fake hadith to make people aware. It's mashhur ala al-alsina, famous on the tongues. And there's so many. You might think, right, even I thought this when I was first like looking at hadith and stuff, that all the Mawdoo hadith, they would have been gone by now. People would have clocked them. But wallahi, no word of a lie, there's a lot of Mawdoo hadith which are actually in Allah al-Masnu'a. They're actually in kind of these Kitab al-Mawdu'at that people spread as text messages all the time. Maybe people have stopped sending them to me and this brother's here, but it's still in circulation. So many hadith. And it's not just hadith, people just spread anything. The organ donation thing, every day is a day, or they're going to take your organs every single day, right? Tomorrow is the day, tomorrow is the deadline. Even like medics, some of our brothers who know about it are working, as in hospital every single day. They're the ones who are spreading it, right? Sometimes. Anything that sounds interesting or a bit spicy, a bit of masala here and there, let's spread it. They're gonna take your organs, it's British, they just want to take your organs, kind of thing. So we need to kind of be aware of these. And then the hadith munkar. Hadith munkar. There's so many definitions for this. We mentioned this last time. هو الحديث الذي في إسناده راو فحش غلته وكثرت غفلته أو ظهر فسقه، وهذا التعريف ذكره الحافظ ابن حجر ونسبه لغيره، وما شاء على هذا التعريف البيقوني في منظومته، ومنكر الفرد به راو غدا تعديله لا يحمل التفردا. Okay, so there's two definitions which are given for munkar. One is that this particular rawi, this particular narrator, he has really atrocious mistakes, or he has many periods of unawareness, right? Or unawareness meaning he doesn't know what day it is when people narrate hadith to him. So, oh yeah, you narrated this hadith to me, Sheikh. Oh yeah, I did. 2014. I remember. He actually doesn't remember. It's talqeen kind of thing. And then you have ظهر فسقه. He's apparently he's doing like really bad things, in in front of everyone. You see him, he'll jump out the pub. He knows all the pub names, this guy. So, a bit naughty, this sheikh. So this kind of thing. And then the second definition is a da'if narrator. He narrates something which contradicts a narration narrated by someone who is thiqa, someone who is higher than him in authenticity. And the difference between this and the shadh narration we mentioned in the beginning is that shadh narration, who is a hadith, they narrate something that's contradicting to someone above them, someone higher in authenticity. So both of them are authentic. One of them is higher in authenticity than the other. This person narrates something contradicting to his narration. This is called hadith shadh. But when a da'if narrator narrates something against a thiqa, a reliable narrator, this is called hadith munkar. Yeah, this is hadith munkar, and this is the difference between the two. Munkar is one of them is accepted, one of them is not accepted. Shadh is when both of them are accepted and one of them is higher than the other. And there's many examples given. We've given them as well. There's this narration again. Remember about eating apples. There's hadith. أبو زكير يحيى بن محمد بن قيس عن هشام بن عروة عن أبيه عن عائشة مرفوعا كلوا البلح بالتمر فإن ابن آدم إذا أكله غضب الشيطان. So eat different types of dates, because whenever a child of Adam eats this, whenever a human being eats these dates, then shaitan gets angry. That's of course. قال النسائي هذا حديث منكر تفرد به أبو زكير وهو شيخ صالح أخرجه له مسلم في المتابعات غير أنه لم. Okay, so he says that this sheikh, he's a sheikh Salih, Abu Zukair, sheikh Salih, and Imam Muslim even narrates from him, right? But he narrates from him in the mutaba'at, in the follow-up narrations. So the way Imam Muslim is a Sahih Hadith, book of Sahih Hadith, but he narrates the most authentic one in the beginning, and as proofs for that authentic narration, he narrates several other hadith with different chains, but maybe they are less in authenticity than the first hadith. But people always say, okay, this narrator is in Sahih Muslim, but not necessarily this hadith narrator is authentic just because he's in Sahih Muslim. By virtue of him being in Sahih Muslim, he does not become authentic, because as we mentioned, Imam Muslim might mention him for mutaba'at, and we go into that later on in this book. Again, this hadith, Muhammad Siddiq's favorite hadith, he always mentions this hadith shadh. ما رواه ابن أبي حاتم من طريق حبيب بن حبيب الزيات عن أبي إسحاق عن عيزار ابن حريث عن ابن عباس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال من أقام الصلاة, whoever establishes salah, وآتى الزكاة, and gives the zakah, وحج البيت, and does hajj, وصام, and they fast in the month of Ramadan, وقرأ الضيف, and they entertain guests, they are good hosts to guests, دخل الجنة, that they enter paradise. This hadith this brother likes very much, but again shadh. Okay, and finally, or maybe not finally, we should go for about 10-15 more minutes inshallah. Hadith mu'allal. Okay, madraj par khatam karte hain. So hadith ma'roof, this is the opposite of hadith munkar. It's when a thiqa narrator, a reliable narrator, narrates something which contradicts a weak, ما رواه الضعيف, contradicts a weak narrator. فهو بهذا المعنى مقابل للمنكر. It's opposite to munkar hadith. MashaAllah. Looking very nice with the jubba and the coat.
Thank you very much.
Blends in. أو بتعبير أدق ومقابل لتعريف المنكر الذي اعتمده الحافظ ابن حجر. So again, we give two definitions of hadith munkar. Okay, so this hadith that Muhammad Siddiq likes, من أقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة وحج البيت وصام وقرأ الضيف دخل الجنة. Whoever prays the salah, gives the zakah, does hajj of the house, meaning does hajj, and fasts during the month of Ramadan, and entertains guests, they will enter paradise. This hadith, he likes this hadith. This hadith, again, رواه موقوفا عن ابن Abbas. The actual narration is that this is a saying of Ibn Abbas. It's not the saying of the Messenger ﷺ, but this sheikh, he mentions this hadith, and he said this is from the narrations of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but he was mistaken. Ibn Abbas didn't hear from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was actually his saying, and Habib was mistaken in this. Habib ibn Habib. Because okay, so Ibn Abi Hatim said this hadith is munkar because other than Habib, right? People who narrated it other than him, they narrated it from Ibn Abbas, but he narrated it from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the hadith is actually fine, the text of the hadith, but it was actually to do with the chain. He said he went all the way back to the Prophet, but he actually didn't. It was from Ibn Abbas. So he went against someone who was more authentic than him. Hence this hadith, a bit problematic. Okay, Shadh wal Mahfuz. Again, we discussed what hadith Shadh was. Okay, this hadith Shadh again, Mithal al-Shudud fi Sanad. Example of Shadh hadith fi Sanad is from the hadith of Ibn Uyayna from Amr ibn Dinar and Awsaja and Ibn Abbas أن رجلا توفي على عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ولم يدع وارثا إلا مولى هو أعتقه. Why is everything to do with inheritance coming today? The inheritance problem says, well, his kids worked it out, mashallah. Quite well. So all these hadith are to do with inheritance. So a man came to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A man passed away, and he never left any inheritors except for a slave which he freed. This is just a hadith. It's nothing to do with the content of the hadith. What we're actually discussing is the chain of the hadith. So there was difference of opinion if whether this hadith actually goes back to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam or not. If it's a connected chain back to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And another hadith as well. This hadith is an important one. Shadh hadith in the Matan. Abu Dawud and Tirmidhi narrates from Abdul Wahid ibn Zayyad from A'mash from Abu Salih. Who is A'mash? Sulaiman ibn Mahran. What does he do? Why do we talk about him a lot in the past couple of weeks? He? Yeah, and he's one of those mudallisin as well. So whenever he says an, so he says an al-Amash an Abi Salih, an Abi Hurairah. So whenever he says an, we have to look, okay, did he actually hear it from Abu Salih or not? He said this hadith, إِذَا صَلَّى أَحَدُكُمُ الْفَجْرِ. When any of you pray Fajr, Salah, فَلْيَضْتَجِعْ أَنْ يَمِينِي. Let him lie by his side, from right side. Right? Some fuqaha took from this, it's wajib, it's an obligation for you to lie on your right side after praying Fajr. Like some of the Zahiri scholars, Abu Dawud al-Zahiri, I think Ibn Hazm as well, I'm not sure. So Al-Bayhaqi said Abdul Wahid, he contradicted many other people. So people narrated this from the acts of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they didn't narrate it from his sayings. Abdul Wahid was the only one who said it from the students of A'mash, who narrated it with this wording. So this is an example where the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam might have lied down on his right. He might have done that, but he didn't tell people to do it. He said that the Messenger said, and whenever one of you pray Fajr, let him lie on his right side. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam never said that, but he did it. But this guy's mixing it up. But you have to be precise. If the Messenger said it, he said it, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If he did it, he did it. You have to say he did it. You can't just say he said for you to do it when he did it himself. So this is when you do a bit of mixy, no good. Shadh. So the Shadh. What? So the Shadh hadith, what's the status of a Shadh hadith then? This hadith, this type of hadith, do you accept it or reject it? Reject it unless, you love rejecting everything. Except if there's another, hadith to support it that helps it. Amal mahfuz fahu hadith maqbool. Okay, the next type of hadith is hadith mu'allal. Hadith mu'allal, which means there's illah in hadith. Shukran. So, hadith mu'allal, we actually spoke about it. Do you know illah? What's illah?
Illa. Oh.
It's your favorite one. It's your favorite part of the definition. Hidden defect. MashaAllah. So what is meant by a hidden defect? What is a hidden defect? This is what we're inshallah going to just discuss briefly. And there's a few incidents here. So there was a hadith narrator called Sharik, and he was a, mashallah, very joker like a type of hadith narrator, you know, kana mazzahan. He was narrating hadith, right? And I've mentioned this story before. So Sharik, he was like a really kind of jokey personality kind of guy. And he had a student called Thabit. And Thabit, one day he was late for the lesson, for the hadith lesson. And this hadith lesson is how they used to happen is the teacher narrates the hadith, all the students either they write it down or they memorize it, right? So Sharik is narrating the hadith and his student Thabit walks in the middle, right? So Sharik is saying حدثنا الأعمش عن أبي سفيان عن جابر عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. So he's narrating some hadith. So he's saying A'mash narrated to me from Abu Sufyan, from Jabir, from the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he looks up and he sees Thabit walking in. And you know, he's a bit of a joker and he says, oh, Thabit, very Sufi guy, mashallah. One of my students, very Sufi student. So he's narrating hadith and everyone's writing down and no one looks up. Everyone's just writing. Thabit walks in and he's narrating this hadith saying, oh, Amish narrated to me from Abu Sufyan, from Jabir, from the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he looks at Thabit and he goes, wah, wah, wah. Man kathurat salatuhu bil-layl, hasanat wajhuhu bin-nahar. Hasuna wajhuhu bin-nahar. Whoever has abundant prayer in the night, then their face is illuminated during the day. So you go, Hassan, you got a really nice face, you know. So obviously the students who are writing, they think they're authentic people. Right? And this sheikh is authentic as well. But because they weren't paying attention, they wrote this hadith and it entered the corpus of hadith. And think about this sentence. It sounds like a good sentence, you know. Whoever prays a lot during the night, you know, their face is illuminated during the day. It sounds like a nice sentence. Sounds like a hadith, innit? But it entered the hadith corpus. Not because people had bad intentions, because they weren't paying attention, you know. And the hadith scholars later on, they clocked. So Thabit, you know, he thought this hadith was from, so the people around him thought that, you know, these people, this was from the words of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it wasn't. This mentioned Sharh Al-Fiyat al-Iraqi. And there's many incidents like this, and people say, okay, how do we actually clock this illah in hadith, this hidden defect? A hidden defect is, for example, everyone in the chain. So imagine the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And I'm the hadith, I'm getting the hadith, and I'm saying this hadith is authentic because he's authentic. Because he's authentic, he's authentic. And he heard from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All of these people are authentic, right? And this hadith reached the book and everyone's looked at hadith, Sahih brother, you know, this Sahih hadith. But this hadith has an illah inside. Illah could be many things. Illah could be, you know, you mixed up the names. You mixed up the actual hadith upside down, you know, ulta kar diya, maqloob, hadith maqloob. It could be that, you know, so-and-so, your father and son, you know, you narrated from your father, example, you narrated from your father, but so many fathers, right, they died before their sons were born, so they could never have heard from their father, right? But it makes sense if you're his father and son, it could be that he narrated from him. It could be the case, and people are often tricked, right, by this kind of thing. So only a master of hadith can tell the illah, and people started saying, oh, this knowledge is it's not a science. It's not like a kind of falsifiable science, right? Something which is just magic. You guys are just making it up as you go along, right? So a man came to Abu Zur'a, who is a famous hadith scholar, and he said, فَسَأَلَهُ عَنْ عِلْمِ الْحَدِيث, and he said, أَهُوَ عِلْمٌ أَوْ كَهَانَةٌ, is it a knowledge or is it some fairy tale fabrication, you know, magic, hocus pocus? الَّذِي لَمْ يَعْرِفْ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ, and he said, the person who doesn't know this knowledge, they will say it's magic, and whoever knows the knowledge will say it's actual science, right? So he goes to me, okay, ask me, فَسَلْنِي عَنْ أَيِّ حَدِيثٍ شِئْتَ وَأَذْكُرُ لَكَ عِلَّتَهُ. So ask me any hadith, and I'll tell you the illah of this hadith. And then he goes, ثُمَّ اذْهَبْ إِلَى مُحَمَّدْ بْن مُسْلِمْ بْن وَرَّاء ثُمَّ سَلْهُ عَنْ هَذَا الْحَدِيث. Then go to Muhammad ibn Muslim ibn Warra and ask him about the same hadith. Don't tell him that what I told you. Don't tell him that you met me. Just go and ask him about the hadith. And then after that, go to Abu Hatim al-Razi, who's another hadith scholar. Go to him and ask him about it. Right? Ask him about the hadith. If all of our things, all of our illahs regarding the hadith are the same, if we unite upon our illahs of this particular hadith, know that this is a science. And if we differ, then no, it's not science. And subhanAllah, he asked him about one particular hadith, and he went to the guys, right, and he found, subhanAllah, this is actually a science, and it's not a sorcery as he originally claimed, and this is found in Maqasid al-Hasana and Ma'rifat Ulum al-Hadith. So there's many things about illah we can say. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala was a master of illah. Once Imam Muslim narrated hadith to his Ustad al-Bukhari, and he says that it's the hadith about kafaratul majlis, about finishing subhanallah bihamdihi subhanakallahumma bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. We'll finish this majlis soon, inshallah. But when you finish a gathering, you say this dua. So Imam Muslim is narrating this hadith to his teacher al-Bukhari, and he says, قال حدثنا ابن جريج عبد الملك ibn Abdul Aziz and Musa and Uqba and Suhail ibn Abi Saleh from his father Abu Saleh from Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and then he presented the hadith to Bukhari. And then al-Bukhari said, هذا حديث مليح ولكن له علة. So he said this hadith is good hadith, except it's got one illah inside. And Imam Muslim said, what's the illah? And he goes, لا أظن I don't think Musa ibn Uqba didn't hear from Suhail, right? These are two authentic narrators, but he didn't travel to the land of Suhail, and he didn't hear from him. And Musa, sometimes he just tadlis. Remember we spoke about tadlis. Sometimes he misses. He heard from him, and this is what al-Bukhari said to Imam Muslim. And Imam Muslim said, "Da'ni an uqabbil bayna udhunayk ya ustad al-ustadhin." Let me kiss on your forehead, O teacher of teachers, because he was aware of this illah, and al-Bukhari was a master of illah, and he taught his student al-Muslim like this. And there's many hadith, like I said, they might have crept into the corpus of hadith. They might crept into the corpus of hadith, and they're narrated in the hadith book. For example, the hadith of Sahih Muslim, we mentioned it many times, that a man came to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said that, what do I need to, in terms of my prayer, how much do I pray? And he said, okay, pray your amount, your 5 daily prayers, that's enough. And he goes, anything else? And he goes, illa an tatawwa, except that you do nafal, you do extra prayers. And then he said, in regards to my fasting, anything else I need to do except for my obligation? He said, no, only fast Ramadan. And he said, Hajj, do the Hajj, and that's enough. And then the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, aflaha wa abihi in sadaqah, that he's successful and his father if he's telling the truth, meaning that he doesn't need to do anything else. And then this hadith is mentioned, the hadith scholars later mentioned that, it's been narrated with 2 turuq, aflaha wallahi and aflaha wa abihi. So some scholars said aflaha wallahi, that he's successful by Allah, and some scholars said aflaha wa abihi. Then people said, what did he mean by aflaha wa abihi? They tried to interpret it, meaning this was okay for the messenger to do qasam on someone other than Allah because he had, the belief. Some people say that, some scholars say that. Some scholars say, oh, aflaha wa rabbi abihi, that's muqaddar, it's hidden, implied, and several different ta'wil. But the reality is that Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim, who's someone further down the chain, he narrated it to his students in a gathering, and he must have said, aflaha wa abihi, aflaha wallah. So he's narrated aflaha wallahi as the hadith is, and all his students have heard one time. And one time when he narrated it, right, aflaha wa abihi, and one of the students who narrated that, it reached Imam Muslim later on, and he documented this hadith. Everyone in the chain was authentic, right? But the student of Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim must have heard it wrong. Right? He must have heard it wrong. And the reason we know that is Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim, other transmission from Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim, aflaha wallahi exists from Sa'ad ibn Ibrahim. And Imam Malik narrates this hadith in the Muwatta, aflaha wallahi. So the way you understand illah is that you gather all the different chains, and this is how you kind of recognize an illah in a hadith. So it's something that's hidden, and it's something that is reprehensible. I mean, it's something that affects the reliability of a hadith, but is only sort of understood only kind of picked up on by hadith scholars. And it's really jaleel and diqqa, it's a really kind of nuanced thing. So a lot of scholars, not all of the scholars actually delved into this, only people like Ibn al-Madini, Ahmad, Ibn Hanbal, al-Bukhari, Abu Hatim, al-Daraqutni, they kind of discuss these kinds of things. So the way we kind of are guided towards an illah is when a single narrator narrates something different from the rest of them. Could be an illa, it's one of the red flags for a hadith scholar, could be an illa, or it could be that he goes against his fellow narrators who are maybe stronger than him. Okay, so these are the ways of telling illa, and then an illa doesn't have to be necessarily in the matan of the hadith. It could be that the hadith is said that this hadith is mursal when it's actually mawsul, or the hadith is mawsul when it's actually mursal, meaning that a person said this is from the sayings of the tabi'in, right? A tabi'i said this, is a good saying, a nice kind of wisdom quote kind of thing, and people say this is a hadith. So everyone in the chain might be okay, but again, this wasn't from the words of the messenger. Why? Because other people would have heard this, right, directly from the messenger. Or it could be the case that there's another chain which goes back to that particular tabi'i, and there's another chain that goes back to the particular tabi'i. All the other chains except for this chain goes to that individual. So then you would prefer based on numbers, etc., and who actually narrated this. Okay. So the way to recognize illah and deduce illah is through jam' al-turuq, to gather all the chains. So illah can happen in isnad and it can happen in matan, and these are the ways we kind of we spoke about illah. This is how we kind of know what illah is. So the books, famous books on illah: Kitab al-Ilal by Ali ibn al-Madini, you have Ilal al-Hadith by Ibn Abi Hatim, al-Hanbal, al-Kabir al-Saghir by at-Tirmidhi, al-Ilal al-Warida fi al-Hadith al-Nabawiyya by ad-Daraqutni, and this is the most kind of the most enveloping. It has a lot of these kind of things inside. I think the last thing which we'll talk about is Hadith Mudraj, and there's a reason why we'll speak about that. Talk about that afterwards. So in terms of this hadith where a weaker narrator goes against a stronger narrator, is, for example, you can have a hadith mudraj, hadith maqlub, al-mazid fi al-muttasil asanid, wal-muttarab al-musahhaf. So just a brief kind of overview of what they are. Al-hadith mudraj is when darj means to enter. So you add your own thing in the hadith. So it could be a hadith narrated about, for example, the hadith about وَيْلٌ لِلْأَعْقَابِ مِنَ النَّارِ. The Messenger ﷺ said that woe be unto the people who kind of leave their ankles dry, right? And Abu Hurairah, from his speech, he said, أَسْبِغُ الْوُضُوء, right? Or أَسْبِغُ الْوُضُوء عَلَى الْمَكَارِهِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام أو كما قال رضي الله تعالى عنه, that complete your wudu in its entirety. So he's explaining what the Prophet ﷺ said before, right? So he said, complete your wudu, but that's from his own kind of thing. So he entered this thing into the hadith. So this is called mudraj, when you enter your own saying into the hadith, mudraj. And then it could be the case that, a person is trying to explain something, explain the words of the messenger by saying it with easy words. But you can understand that certain things, for example, you won't say, I mean this by this. For example, the Messenger ﷺ said, أَكْثِرُ هَذِهِ الْلَذَّاتِ, that remember abundantly the destroyer of pleasures, هُوَ الْمَوْتِ, and that is death. Some people said this is mudraj. Other people said it wasn't mudraj. Some people said, why would he say the destroyer of pleasures? Everyone knew what he was talking about. He wouldn't have had to clarify, and that is death. Because you don't clarify your own speech like that, right? So it could be that kind of thing. And then we have hadith maqlub, which is kind of flipped. So it could be you flip it in the names as well. For example, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, you say Abdullah ibn Muhammad, you flip it completely. Could be like this hadith about, when you go down into ruku, when you go down to sajda, you put your knees first and then your hands and then your nose, right? But some hadith mentions the hands first, the nose first, and the hands and then the knees. There's maqlub, they flipped it all the way around in the matan. And then you have a musahhaf, you have muttarab, which is a shaky hadith. Again, we'll go through the ta'rif of that, the definitions of that. And then the last one is musahhaf, where you have, a clear kind of error, scribal error. It could be kind of, instead of Amar, you say Umar, you completely change it. Instead of kind of a dot is omitted, the word is completely changed. A word that looks like a particular word is completely changed. You have that thing in the English language. Some people send that text message around where, you have words that you can't see clearly, and then you can work it out because you read Walaikum salam. You read by looking at words, not looking at the individual letters later on, right? So some people could kind of get tricked by that and deceived. And this hadith musahhaf. And these are the types of kind of mukhalafat al-thiqat. And I think we'll leave it there, inshallah, and we will continue. And this is the final lesson, inshallah, before we head to Andalusia. And we'll continue afterwards, inshallah, in January. Subhanallah, bihamdi, subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah.